Libs are hoping for John Fetterman's failure and don't even realize they're coping. I think that anybody who is wishing for John Fetterman's failure is just a disgusting establishment shill, not an actual even lib. I think if you're rooting for John Fetterman's failure, it's because you're a psychotic anti-leftist. You're not actually like a normal human. You're like a freak. You're like a point. You're basically like the people that don't like John Fetterman who are on the left. They come in two types. One, the people who are like, he's not left-wing enough, which, I mean, he's a senatorial candidate. That's, he's about as left-wing as it gets for a swing state. I don't know what to say. I mean, you're getting a Paul Wellstone. Yeah, he's not a communist, but what do you want? What do you expect? In America, in year of our Lord 2022, I think that's a ridiculous critique of John. I think we could disagree with him on a certain issue and push him, but to be like, oh, fuck him, that's insane. That's literally insane. If you had told me, oh, Mike, we're going to be in 2017, if you had been like, oh, Mike, John Fetterman is going to win the nomination in 2022, I would have been like, get the fuck out of here. Because he got like 10% of the vote then. What are your thoughts on Charles Booker running for Senate in Kentucky against Rand Paul? I think he's got no shot because Kentucky is far right. That's my view. But
we're talking about Joe Biden's upcoming visit to the Middle East, which includes a stop in Riyadh and a meeting with none other than Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, a man he once loudly condemned for ordering the killing of Saudi journalist and US resident Jamal Khashoggi. Joining me now is Peter Beinart. He's editor-at-large at Jewish Currents and an MSNBC political analyst. Also, Abdullah Al-Auda, a US-based researcher whose father, a prominent Saudi cleric, has been imprisoned by MBS in Saudi Arabia since 2017. He's research director for the Gulf at the think tank Dawn, or Democracy for the Arab World Now. That's what Dawn stands for. Thank you both for joining me. Peter, let me start with you. What we're seeing happen under Biden with relation to Saudi Arabia, the ongoing war in Yemen, the ongoing...
See, that's fine. If Saudi Arabia has gulags, if Saudi Arabia executes dissidents, if Saudi Arabia murders American residents and embassies, that's fucking fine. But Venezuela wants to spend their oil money on building public housing? We can't have that! Seize their money! Sanction their country! Blockade their ports!
U.S. arms sales and now this Biden visit. Should I not be as bothered by this as I am? Is this just old-fashioned pragmatism versus idealism in the battle between our values versus our interests? Our interests win again? Is that all that's happening here?
It's interesting. When America makes exceptions and America supports arms, embraces dictatorships that kill journalists, dictatorships that have created one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world by ravaging Yemen. Genocide. We say it's pragmatism, and after all, we don't live in an ideal world, right? But that's not the way we talk about our adversaries, right? This is part of the fallacy of American exceptionalism. We allow ourselves to make these exceptions when there happen to be dictatorships that we have an interest with, but we say that basically we still fundamentally believe in democracy and freedom. But that's not the way it looks to the rest of the world, right? For the rest of the world, it shows that the entire discourse that the Biden administration has put front and center, that we represent democracy and freedom as opposed to our adversaries representing authoritarianism, what they show is that actually it's just window dressing for the fact that we have certain countries that are allies and we have certain countries that are adversaries. And so and it shows that it's really just a struggle of raw power. And I think that undermines America's advantage over authoritarian countries like Russia and China.
What was it? Was it Truman who said
advantage?
He may be a SOB, but he's our SOB?
The world is embracing China. And the world is embracing China for one reason. China is approaching them with fair deals. That is why the world is embracing China. Not because they agree with everything that China does domestically, but because China is coming to them with fair deals. Not exploitation, not ruinous IMF restructuring and privatizations and liberalizations, but for fair deals. Hey, we'd like to buy your cobalt. Can we invest? Versus America, oh, you want to nationalize your own oil? Let's have a CIA coup. The world is embracing China because China is treating the world fairly. And they're going to win.
SOB, which kind of summed up what you were just saying. Abdullah, you just came back from attending the unveiling of the new DC street name, Khashoggi Way, which is outside the Saudi embassy, rather appropriately. The timing of this, though, is deeply ironic. The nation's capital renaming a street after an assassinated journalist when the nation's president is going to meet the guy who ordered his killing. How does that make you feel?
It's rather ironic because...
It's so funny when you watch Westerners critique China's Belt and Road Initiative, because it's like, oh, Mike, you know, they didn't give a perfectly, you know, they got an advantage in this deal, or you know, they did this or that, and you know, critiquing some individual circumstance. The U.S. literally sends covert operatives to assassinate and coup people who don't allow us to exploit their resources. We create special operations death squads that go around and kill labor leaders. You have no fucking idea what you're talking about. Compare the U.S. and China and their foreign policy, especially in exploited countries with resources, is so night and day. You have to be a complete fucking dupe to buy the idea that the U.S. is anywhere close to fair in comparison to China. It's night and day. It's night and fucking day. And if you don't think so, you don't know what you're talking about.
Let's remember your viewers that just last week, senior official from the Biden administration,
and I know you're not used to somebody telling you that. I know you're used to people telling you like, oh, it's totally rational that the U.S. has hundreds of bases overseas. Oh, it's totally rational that the U.S. has tried to has done like 40 assassination attempts on Fidel Castro, that has tried to coup Venezuela 4 times, that has invaded Nicaragua, has funded the death squads of the Contras, that funded death squads in Afghanistan and pedophile warlords in Afghanistan. The United States couped Mohammad Mossadegh, democratically elected leader of Iran. It's totally fucking normal that the U.S. supported Saddam Hussein. It's totally normal that the United States supports the Saudi royal family. Are you fucking nuts? The United States supported martial law in Taiwan for 40 years. The United States supported a military junta in South Korea for 40 fucking years. Yeah, that's normal. That's normal, chat. That's okay. But Mike, did you know there were some labor abuses in this country that China buys resources from? That's equal. What's wrong with your brain? What's wrong with your brain? That's why we're losing. I'm not saying this because I hate America. I'm saying it because I don't want us to lose. I want to have a better there's a lot of things I don't like about the Chinese system. I don't want it to be the dominant system. It's winning because we are evil. Not saying that they're good. We're the greater of the two evils for most countries in the world. I think that's bad.
To MBS and the Saudi government that they are going to move on from the Khashoggi murder in order to repair ties with the Saudi government. And this sign is just a message to, let's face it, both parties, that we are not going to move on. I mean, Khashoggi murder is not, it hasn't been, we haven't held accountable those who were complicated in the murder. Justice has not been served. Jamal's body is yet to be found.
Juan Guaido walks around as a free man in Venezuela. If Venezuela was some sort of evil dictatorship, how the fuck is Juan Guaido walking around?
Prisoners of conscience, including my father, who are languishing in jail for years and who Jamal Khashoggi advocated for years, are still in prison while Biden is going to meet and shake hands with this guy who...
My favorite kind of lib or libs that say American exceptionalism works in reverse too. No, America is just exceptionally imperialist. We're the world global hegemon. We are the one that most of the every evil system you see, we are directly involved in. Even Russia, we created Putin. Iran, we couped Mossadegh. North Korea, we leveled every single standing structure in Korea. The U.S. Air Force had to stop bombing North Korea because we didn't have any more targets to bomb. We had bombed every single water treatment plant, every power plant, every bridge, every home, every apartment building, every government building. Every dam. There was nothing left to fucking bomb. So what are you fucking talking about, man? What are you talking about?
Threatened us, who actually intimidated my family, banned 19 members of my family from travel, and harassed friends.
I mean, I think it's a pretty good bet, Abdullah, sadly, that the president is not going to be mentioning your family or your father when he meets with MBS. We don't know whether he's even going to mention Khashoggi. We know that Jake Sullivan, or it's been reported that Jake Sullivan, his national security advisor, got shouted at by MBS, berated after he raised the Khashoggi issue with the Crown Prince on one of his recent visits to the kingdom. Peter, Joe Biden and his administration are now leaning into the Israel argument for this visit, that we're going to protect Israel. It's not about Saudi Arabia. Biden's also going to stop off and see Israel's far-right Prime Minister Naftali Bennett before he goes to see the journalist-killing Crown Prince MBS. You talk to members of this administration. You know their foreign policy views and thinking. What are they thinking here? Because they're leaning into this argument that Trump pushed, which is the Gulf countries and Israel.
Here's what they're thinking. If we cuck ourselves, if we make ourselves pathetic, if we crawl on our bellies like a worm, maybe MBS will increase oil production and that'll lower the price of gasoline and we might get reelected. We might be able to beat inflation. So if we humiliate ourselves and debase everything we say we believe in, maybe oil prices will go down a little bit and we won't lose. That's what they're thinking. That's their foreign policy thinking.
They'll get together, form a big regional security alliance of rather authoritarian leaders on the excuse of fighting Iran, and yet the Biden administration came into office with a pretty good plan.
What are we fighting Iran for? I mean, what are we even fighting Iran for? What is the point? What the fuck is even the point?
Zeroed in on
to deal with Iran, which was rejoin the nuclear deal that was working and that we haven't rejoined.
Right. I mean, you don't need to create this military alliance between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which are not threatening one another, if you actually get back into the Iran nuclear deal, right, which then stops Iran's nuclear program. So they need to do this because they haven't been willing to have the political fight that would be required to enter the nuclear deal. And again, just to go back to the theme of our conversation, democracy versus authoritarianism, let's be clear, this new axis that is forming between a brutally repressive regimes in Bahrain, in Saudi Arabia, in United Arab Emirates, and an Israeli government led by a man, Naftali Bennett, that wants permanent control over millions of Palestinians who lack the most basic rights in what's been called by Israel's own leading human rights organizations apartheid. This is not an alliance built on democracy and freedom, right? It's an alliance of basic different regimes that help one another repress their own populations. And again, for a president who came into office saying that after the Trump era, he was going to restore America's struggle for democracy around the world, it looks pretty shabby.
That was what makes it so much worse, because he's the one, we didn't force him to say it, he's the one who came in loudly attacking Trump, loudly attacking MBS, calling for a clash between democracies and authoritarians, saying he was on the side of democracy, which makes this visit so awkward. Abdullah, some in the West, mostly those who support warming ties with Saudi Arabia, say the kingdom is moving towards progressive, liberal reforms. It's opening up culturally, online, through social media. You've got pop concerts and movie cinemas. And yet at the same time, as you mentioned, your father, who is seen by some as a reformist cleric, has been held in prison for many years. Other human rights...
I mean, people don't even understand. Like, people want to talk about North Korea, and it's funny to me because you obviously don't know anything about Korea. After World War II, the Soviets proposed that the United States and the Soviet Union jointly withdraw their troops and allow Korea to be an independent nation. And the United States said no. Why do we have a North Korea and South Korea? Because the United States said no to the idea of withdrawing their troops jointly with the Soviet Union. Guess you didn't learn that one. Mike, do you think it was that simple? Yes. But Mike, we wanted to have a puppet in South Korea. We wanted to have a military dictatorship.
Abuses continue. Are people in the West seeing what they want to see about this new Saudi Arabia under liberal MBS? Are they looking only at the liberal reforms and not the ongoing authoritarian brutality?
Yes, they do. And let's remind your viewers also that Lujain al-Hudrul, who led actually the movement for women to drive, was locked up in jail for years, was tortured by MBS himself, who at the same time was preaching about women's rights and liberation and trying to sell to the West the idea that he's liberating women and making all these social reforms. And the same women who actually spent years fighting the male guardianship system were also electrocuted in prison. Point. Yeah, and therefore it's actually.
By the way, chat, the Soviets did withdraw their troops anyway from North Korea. But the U.S. left their troops in South Korea to uphold their fucking anti-communist puppet who is restricting freedom of the press and was doing repression on the South Korean people. We forgot that.
Actually ironic for the West now, or for Biden to say that he's going to Arabia to help peace. What kind of peace is MBS making when he is waging the worst humanitarian crisis in Yemen and blockading neighboring country, threatening Lebanon, Iraq, and all neighboring countries? There's nothing about peace. And I remember any war between Israel and Saudi Arabia for the past 70 years.
If you don't know anything about Korea, it's fine. But between Hasan laughing about working class people being idiot white trash drones and you being pro-Russia China, I don't know who triggers me more. There's nothing. You calling me pro-Russia and China for explaining fucking Cold War facts. You are the same as a conservative who's against critical race theory. You are literally the same as a conservative who goes, they're teaching our kids to hate themselves. I'm sorry, are you feeling dissonance from your reality of what America really does in the world? You're teaching me to hate my country. I hate you. I hate you. Also, Hasan does not hate working class people. You're a fucking dipshit.
Some people go on about, well, women can drive now, while ignoring the fact, as you pointed out, that Lujain al-Hudrul, who was the activist who pushed for women to drive, was imprisoned and allegedly tortured by the Saudi regime. Peter, the Biden administration is saying this trip isn't about gas prices, even though that's what officials had repeatedly signaled. That's what we all kind of know is the underlying...
It's so funny because if you go to encyclopedia.com, it's funny because I was going to look up... I couldn't remember who the dictator was in South Korea. I couldn't remember his name. And I'm just looking at it right now. And it's so obvious that the South started the Korean War. They're talking about this island that was independently ruled by leftists, which is Jeju-do. And they sent in the military to suppress the population and attack everybody. And there was like a revolt. And then the military switched sides to the leftists. The South Korean military that was sent to repress the rebellion switched sides. Anyway, never mind.
Justification. Anytime I criticize Joe Biden online for going to Saudi Arabia, I'm told, no, he has to go. It's about gas prices at the pump. What else is he supposed to do? And yet, we know that the gas prices are driven by the Russia-Ukraine war more than anything else. We also know that pumping more Gulf oil only helps to kill the planet. Joe Biden is the one telling us that when he talks about climate change.
Right. And I think that there's a really important point here to make about the dynamic of Cold Wars. There are a lot of people in Washington, Medhi, as you know, who are really excited about Cold War 2.0 against Russia and China. And let's be clear, Russia is doing horrific things in Ukraine. The Chinese government is very, very brutal. Absolutely. But the danger of jumping into a Cold War fight is not only that it undermines cooperation on things like climate change, which is an existential threat, but once you define the world in Cold War terms, you inevitably end up basically overlooking whatever human rights abuses the people on your side are doing. And that's exactly the dynamic that America went through for decades and decades. And now we're seeing it again. Why do we have to keep MBS on our side? Because we've divided the world into zero-sum terms. That's a very dangerous dynamic.
Here's a comparison to the first messages the USSR and U.S. armies gave the Korean people. USSR, Korean people, you have attained liberty and liberation. Now everything is up to you. Acts of resistance will be punished severely. U.S. Soviet army will provide all the conditions for the free and creative labor you are about to embark on. Koreans must make themselves the creators of their own happiness. All persons will obey promptly all my orders. Acts of resistance to occupying forces, any acts which may disturb public peace and safety will be punished severely. For all purposes during the military control, English will be the official language. Yeah. People like to look at the situation now and just go, oh, North Korea bad, South Korea good. And the reason why South Korea is much better now is because the South Korean military leadership South Korea was poorer than North Korea. And the South Korean military leadership said, fuck this. We're tired of being exploited by the United States. And they set up government planning, protectionism, industrial planning, subsidy, and they intervened directly in their economy to make South Korea a robust, developed country. That's why Samsung and LG exist. Because the government stepped in and created them. If they were just, when they were sitting around waiting for the free market, South Korea was one of the poorest countries in the world. They literally farmed using human shit. It was called night soil. That's how poor South Korea was. Are you watching the stream unsubbed? You're making income inequality worse. You are doing anti-praxis. We are the only Twitch stream that will not accept scam advertisers, and I will never fuck you over by selling you crap.